Wanted to start off talking about our first research paper, and that is now live. So if you guys haven't gone through that module yet to do your votes, you can do that after we go through this. So we wanted to talk about our first research project first, and this is oriented around one of the themes of our class, which is climate change. And so I like to refer to climate change as global weirding, because I think that's the best description of it. It's just making the world super weird in all kinds of ways, shapes, and forms. You mostly use the term climate change. The term climate change was invented by someone that was trying to downplay the dangers of CO2 being injected into the atmosphere. We originally called it global warming, which is still what you might hear. But this person was trying to create a more neutral term so it didn't sound as scary. And it turns out, because in some cases, global warming is global warming in many, 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 many cases. In other cases, it's global wetting. In other cases, it's global droughting and all these other things. That climate change actually seems to be a more holistic phrase that actually, and that's one of the reasons why most people use it. But I like global weirding because I think it's a more, gets to the point more quickly. Obviously, we have all these things going on here. These are all aspects of climate change and global weirding, or fires, changing snowfall patterns, all that kind of stuff. And it's important to say that this issue it's never been theoretical, but your ability to talk about this issue to people outside of your immediate circle, it's ceased to become theoretical if it ever was recently, right? Because of particularly events that are unfolding before us. So these are just a couple things. This one's from today. This other one is an email chain that keeps expanding. So, we've had $7 million of our funds here that help pay you guys and equipment and things like that suspended in the last few days because of some people don't want us doing research on social justice or on climate change. And that's just the reality that's going on. And so I want to talk briefly about climate change before we get into the paper. These are all statements made by our president and his views towards this are being manifest to all of us these days. And I want to say that a lot of the feelings that many of you guys are feeling are by design. So you're actually completely playing into the playbook. And so here is part of the playbook.
We want the bureaucrats to be traumatically affected. We want, when they wake up in the morning, we want them to not want to go to work. Because they are increasingly viewed as the villains. We want their funding to be shut down so that the EPA can't do all of the rules against our energy industry because they have no bandwidth financially to do so. We want to put them in trauma.
So that is your new head of OMB, who's now running the show, one of the key authors of Project 2025 that seeks to eliminate climate change responses throughout the Western U.S. And much of the world. And so these are all just recent developments. I mean, we could put 1,000 things up here, but these are all things in the last couple weeks that have materialized, which are specifically attacking science and our research and our responses to climate change. Again, writing a research paper on climate change is not theoretical or conceptual. It is a useful skill to meet the moment that we are in at the moment. I'm sure this is not a surprise to you guys, but so for example, the world that we're in right now is full of, it seems to be full of climate denialism. So things like the president, when he came here last time he was in office, he said, I don't think science knows what's going on with climate change, which is not factually correct. He dismisses sea level rise as creating more oceanfront property, and so therefore it's a good thing. He says that people that listen to scientists will basically drive an economic depression to deal with this stuff, as if the most costly disaster in our state's history from these two wildfires last couple months, as if that's an easy thing to pay for and as if that's a good thing for the economy. And for folks that make warnings about potential scenarios surrounding climate change, he frequently dismisses those folks as so-called prophets of doom. There's a lot of data suppression. My other class, we've had some problems getting some data in the last couple weeks because some of the servers and things are starting to change. And then there's just a lot of erroneous statements made about what people are doing in response to climate change, such as alleging there's a national electric vehicle mandate. There is not. And just frequently confusing facts and not understanding what's going on. In the last month, there's been a huge amount of policy rollbacks, including withdrawing again from the Paris Accords, the U.S. pulling out of the Paris Accords. Active work to halt the Inflation Reduction Act, which funded a lot of things to deal with climate change, such as investments in things like more resilient cities and things of that nature. Those contractors are all not being paid. A lot of people are not being paid right now. The declared national energy emergency said we are in a desperate need for all kinds of energy. We need every single piece of energy. But it defined legally solar energy and wind energy is not energy. So we're not to spend any money on solar or wind or other sustainable sources. The only real sustainable source there that's in there would be hydro and biomass. So those are in the president's emergency energy declaration, but these other things, which are solar and wind, are the fastest growing energy sectors in our nation. Those are defined as not producing any energy. And then NEPA, the National Environmental Protection Act, is the way we review impacts for developments and things of that nature. A presidential executive order from the 70s created by President Carter to try to take care of some of the uncertainty and add clarity, created a committee that essentially determines how we go about the mechanics of this. That's been suspended. So NEPA review of federal projects is now possibly, it's unclear if it'll continue to happen. And then we have a lot of economic and health impacts from climate change. So Project 2025 were all of its aspects to be enacted, and the administration appears to be well on its way to enacting most of, if not all of these, at least the vast majority of these recommendations. It would lead to at least an increase, or the estimates are an increase in 2.7 billion tons of CO2 more into the atmosphere, a reduction of about 1.7 million clean energy jobs, mostly associated with wind and solar and things like that, and a reduction of about a third of $1 trillion from our gross national product, because a lot of these things that we were doing aren't going to take place, and a lot of these more damaging things that costs a lot of stuff like wildfire and things of that nature would be encouraged. The EPA is currently reviewing whether they can limit greenhouse gases.
Is this like the 2.7 billion? Is that a 5-year? So it's
By 2030. So that's now to 2030. And then, of course, environmental justice programs are just being wholesale cut from all different departments across the government, and then things that are being funded, which again are generally our most marginalized communities, the folks that are least able to deal with some of these climate change impacts. Those folks are having their supports removed. And then there's the outright firing of scientists. So I talked to one of our graduates today who graduated in 2018. He's been working with the Park Service for several years, does invasion control, invaders control. Some of you might have taken field methods and seen him. He was on the front lines of the fires the last couple of weeks. He showed up, he got an email on Thursday, Friday, he was fired from his job up at the National Recreation Area, and many other of our colleagues and people we know that's happening to as well. So this committee, which is the one that generates the every 5-year report on the climate assessment, what's going on, just all those folks have been let go. So there's nobody to write the report or oversee the report, I should say. And then there's gag orders on the National Institutes of Health, who have not been allowed to talk or publish the morbidity and mortality monthly report. The EPA, as I showed you that one email that was from NASA, they're like, yeah, no, we can't meet, we can't talk to you anymore. So all that stuff is going on all over the place. And then famously things like firings of the Department of Energy. So 4 days ago, we fired all the folks that are in charge of our nuclear safety and the nuclear weapons security stuff. They were all laid off, all 350 of them. And then they tried to hire them back, and they couldn't get in their emails. So they've since, in the last day or so, they've hired many of them back, but there's still a good number they can't reach because they don't have their contact info, and they just let them go. So that level of firing is going on, just willy-nilly. It's not about cost saving. It's clearly a political thing. And then dealing with a disaster response is becoming completely gutted. So California aid is being tied, at least was alleged to be tied to political favors and political decisions. And there's been several times a statement to delete FEMA altogether, the federal agency that deals with disasters. So this is not theoretical. So this paper you guys are working on, or this argument, this is not just some theoretical thing. It's also important to say, though, in the midst of all this, the intent is to make you all afraid. The intent is to make people that believe in science and objective argumentation coward and afraid. These are some of our data in pink, and then data from across California in yellow, and data from the US in white. And this is people that think climate change is a significant thing and something we should be dealing with. And so we've seen throughout all our polls, our local polls, state of California, the US, since COVID, there's been sort of a plateauing, right? It was sort of, for the most part, going up, more and more people all the time. But even then, even right now, right, we're in the 70 to 80% of the population do think climate change is a real thing, do know that it's a real threat. So again, we sometimes lose this in this conversation, thinking that the whole world has rejected science and observations and stuff. That's not true. But the flattening is worrying. So that's all to say, the skills that we're teaching you in this class and our other classes, these are key, right? So these are your main tools. So, again, do all the readings, read everything, make sure you understand it in and out. We're trying to give all of you skills to deal with this and many other challenges. And this is how you deal with this crazy stuff. We respond with facts and reason and strong arguments. And that's what you guys are going to be working on. So before we talk about our paper, I want to talk about another recent example of maybe not good reasoning. So this was in the Wall Street Journal yesterday. And this is an example of how we do not want you guys to write your papers or make your arguments. So this was an editorial. See, the powers that be don't want me to talk. So this was about our state of California electric vehicle mandate. And you can read the whole op-ed if you like. It's actually an editorial, not an op-ed, but this is the main meat of it. Okay. So the main thing here is if you guys are unaware, we have been having a series of exemptions in the state of California so that we can dictate our own air quality, that our air quality problems in California are such that the standard, the national default approach isn't good enough, that we need to have other tools at our disposal to keep improving air quality. And so one of those is to phase out the routine sale of internal combustion engines in private vehicles by 2035. So that's a state of California thing. And then since we made this, several other states have also adopted that essentially same framework. And that has to be, we essentially every so often have to get a permission from the EPA, the federal entity that's managing that pollution. And we most recently got it in December, the renewal in December. And so what the current administration is trying to do is not just deny it, which they would do what they want to do, but they want to kill it forever. So to do that, they're getting ready to send it to Congress. So they want to send it to Congress and have Congress actively say California can't have a clean air mandate. And so this is the argument these guys make. So have a quick look, see if you guys can read the first paragraph or two of this. Read this argument that they're making in their. We can argue their climate change paper. Okay, you guys get the gist? Everybody get the gist? Okay, so it might, at first pass, might seem okay, I say, hey, they're saying, hey, this. They have some dates in there. They have some numbers in there, right? Problem is the stuff is mostly wrong. So, for example, internal combustion engines do cause smog. They're all the stuff that cause us all our air quality problems, be that NOx, be that particulate matter, be that whatever. So the notion that no one said that CO2 causes smog, right? So that's a fallacious statement meant to make you angry. Next is California doesn't have any more compelling need. Really? We don't have any need to deal with climate change? That seems a little strange and ignorant of what's been going on the last few weeks, for example. And then we have all these numbers that are out in here, right? And so these numbers have been picked very carefully to make sure they make the difference or the absurdity look as much, as intense as possible. So for example, they don't pick last year's sales data, they picked 2 years ago, and so on and so forth. So I've corrected all those numbers if we used something different. And so when you guys write your paper, you need to be detailed, right? You need to be detailed oriented. You want to be specific. You want to be quantitative. So you're not going to argue climate change is bad or whatever. You're going to say, hey, climate change is having already had these impacts, is currently having these impacts, is likely to have these, and how we know that, right? So that's what we're doing. So we're being very specific, very precise. We want to actively support our argument as well as possible all the time. So this is about half a second of Googling will get you to the state of California's publicly available data on EV sales, and that's where I got the data for my thing. So it wasn't the case that this was hard to get data or they were using a few years ago data because it was just hard to get. No, it's because it didn't make their case as strong as they would have liked. Secondly, you all in your paper will be scholarly. Okay, what do I mean by scholarly? I don't mean like some silly professor that sits in a library all day long and doesn't talk to people. But what I mean is scholarly in the true sense of the word, meaning a scholar, meaning I have a strong understanding, a deep understanding of this subject matter. And one of the things you'll be doing in your paper is demonstrating that to us and to the reader that you get it. And so obviously that means you should know the right numbers of in this case, of the EV car sales or something, right? So of course, but you need to go beyond that. And so everybody look at me here. You need to go beyond that. You need to understand the shape of the argument that we're talking about. Okay, so in this case, you would need to understand that the auto industry says the same thing every single time something comes up. They said this in 1970 about seatbelts. They say this about catalytic converters. They say this about anti-lock brakes. They say we can't do it. It's impossible. Nope. Going to drive the industry. The industry is going to shutter. Nope. Can't do it. Can't do it. Can't do it. Can't do it. Right? It's not about climate change or whatever. It's about just an industry wants to do what the industry wants. Right? It's not some anti-environment thing. It's just they don't want regulation, period. So that's the proper frame of this, right? That doesn't take away why we should or shouldn't do a particular thing, but you need to understand that, right? So that would be an example of being scholarly, understanding something about the auto industry. If this was your argument, you're making this thing about the auto industry. Second, it is true that demand for EVs has stalled. That is absolutely the case. So you also should not be afraid to offer information or arguments in your paper that might be counter to your argument, right? So we're not trying to hide stuff from people. We're not trying to hoodwink people as this opinion piece is trying to do. We're trying to make a strong argument. And sometimes, we're not sure of the right path. Sometimes we think that, well, this is the best thing to do, but it also has downsides. Just be honest, right? Talk about that stuff. It's all good. You make a stronger argument when you include some of the points that a critic might argue. And then you can say, yeah, I get that. I appreciate that. That's a real thing. But in the grand scheme of things, I think that that's not as important as X, right? That's a much stronger argument than just hiding, pretending it doesn't exist, putting your head in the sand, et cetera. So in this case, this is data that you can also get from that website, but this is from an article in the LA Times showing the sales of EVs in California, and we only went up 1% this year in terms of what percentage of our new vehicle sales are electric vehicles versus internal combustion engines, right? So it's still going up, but not the way it was. One of the main things that's imploded here, any guesses? Tesla sales have cratered. So a lot of people no longer want to own a Tesla. And so that's going on around the world. But regardless, again, scholarly, that's not the only thing that's going on. Because if we look at, again, the whole big picture, this is data from the car sales folks in California. And this is how many new vehicle registrations. It's going up 2011 or 2010 to 11, 12, going up. It kind of took a dive in the pandemic, not surprising. And then it kind of going up, and it's basically not changed between last year and the year before. So this idea that EV sales aren't growing, nothing is growing, right? So that's a measure probably of our economic situation and inflation and all this and all that kind of stuff, right? So again, that's a scholarly way to do that. So when you're starting to work on your paper, you want to read broadly, right? You want to get a sense of all this kind of stuff. And then once you have, and again, you don't have to spend your whole time looking at historic car sales or something, right? But you want to sort of have a feel for that. And then once you have that feel, then you can go back and do your deep dive into your specific thesis. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? Yeah.
How do you find something that you don't know that you need to be looking for? In that sense of like, this is an easy example, but how
sure.
have I known to look at that?
Right.
That's true.
Right. So the first thing is to read different papers. So when you get to review type papers or investigative journalist type of investigations, many of those good reporters or those good academic studies will reference this stuff, right? So in the introduction to the paper, in a review paper, in a sort of investigative piece on the topic or whatever, there'll be hints that are dropped. And then another one is to use, we gave you guys those suite of tools in the scaffolding your research paper. Research Rabbit in particular is really, really helpful for this, right? So Research Rabbit will, if you put in your 10 references or whatever it is, right, it'll show other papers that have linked to that. And you can use that to sort of say, oh my gosh, there's a bunch of these papers reference this. I don't know what that paper is. You can go find that and actually, oh my God, I didn't even realize that was a dimension that was going on. And then next, we're doing these in pairs. So we're doing this is a group thing. You can bounce ideas off your bud, right? So you and your partner can kick ideas around. So you have them to talk to. And then of course, you also have Professor Spies or me. You guys can come talk, when you guys are starting to have some drafts and some ideas, you can come talk to us. So you have technical resources online, you have each other, and you have us as ways to sort of begin that process. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. All right. Okay, so again, you guys, these skills we're developing in data visualization, this is absolutely useful right now in the job market and all that kind of stuff. Absolutely. One thing, if you haven't looked at it yet, you guys should definitely look at it, which is our module on, so this paper, or this activity, excuse me, that is most of our stuff, data this week is in a module for this week, right? Last week was in a module for last week. This paper thing is going to go for many weeks. And so the module is not going to, so we're going to have this one module. Professor Spies and I will be adding stuff into the module, but it's not, we're going to be returning the same module. And so in that module, one of the things is this piece about the Challenger disaster. And then we have some readings in there about that. And that's an excellent illustration of what happens when you have poor data visualization or poor technical argument making. And so in this case, this is, and before I started talking about this, did anybody remember the Challenger disaster? You guys are probably all way too young. One. Show of hands. How many people, before we started talking about this class, had heard about the Challenger disaster and everything? So about a third of you guys. Okay. So basically, it was a space shuttle. It was essentially early one morning, very cold. It was launching from Florida, Cape Canaveral, and they weren't sure if it was going to be safe because it was like really, really cold. And so we've discontinued the space shuttle. You can see one in the Science Center if you guys go to downtown LA, but none of them fly anymore, except for a secret spy satellite not supposed to know about. But so basically they have these solid rocket boosters on the side, and there's a main tank, and the shuttle is bolted to it. So the main shuttle is reused, but the other big tanks would just be filled with fuel, and they would launch and take off. And so those things had different propellants in them, and they needed to stay inside. And so the SEALs, they were worried about the SEALs, and turns out they were right to be worried about the SEALs because that's what failed and killed all these folks. And so this was the argument that was given to people. So everybody can see that, right? Everybody can make sense of that? No problem? Really obvious? Yeah, okay, good. Make your decision. Should we shoot the space shuttle up or not? Wait, what? I don't know. So here is on the bottom, here is a re-plotting of similar data. So what this was the amount of O-ring damage on this axis at different temperatures, right? So low on the left going to warm on the right. And what you see is when the temperatures that we tested the O-rings at were relatively warm, there wasn't much damage, right? So the SEALs seemed to work like a SEAL. And this was the evidence that was like, yeah, it's fine. So we started to get a little bit cold, and that dude looks pretty sketch. But the temperature at which the space shuttle was launching that morning was here, right? So if we presented it this way, it's a lot easier to see, dude, maybe we should wait another day or let it get warmer in the afternoon or something like that, right? This presentation is the same data, kind of hard to see, right? So good, effective data presentation isn't just making a strong argument. It also can help us avoid making bad decisions or bad, in this case, lethal decisions. Making sense? Everybody with me? Yeah? Okay, cool. All right, so let's talk about our research paper. So this is our first research paper, or our first research activity thing. And so we're going to do this in groups. It's going to be 2 people per group. And so you're going to be looking at California relevant climate change stuff. In some cases, you'll focus only on California. In other cases, you might focus on California and some other stuff too. But there should always be some California nexus in whatever argument you make, whatever data sources you pull in. It's going to be about 10 pages. You're going to have at least 20 references. But if I have 5 data sets, let's say, each of those data sets could count as a reference, right? So a reference is a peer-reviewed paper, a technical publication, something of that nature. It also could be a data set. That is also a reference. So you're going to have at least 20 references, and you're going to make at least 5 new data visualizations for some aspect of the data that's speaking to your thesis or whatever. Cool? And yeah, and so you're gonna tell us what the key elements of this story or this aspect of stuff that's going on. You're gonna work to make a strong evidence-based argument for whatever your thesis you're offering is. Your audience are professional folks, so not second graders or anything, but professional folks, but people that aren't necessarily climate change experts, right? So what that means is you don't have to define statistical significance or something like that, but if you have a particular term, I don't know, marine heat wave or something, right, you need to define what you mean by marine heat wave. Our goal is to, as always, convince a skeptic. This is not a person who's living underground and eating mushrooms and things like that, right? But this is a person that's not sure if your thing is really going on, right? So a polite skeptic, a respectful skeptic. They're not like skeptical just for the sake of being a skeptic. They just don't know about this. They're not sure if what's going on. So that's your audience, and that's the audience you should always have for whatever paper you're pulling together, right? And you as a reader should always be a healthy skeptic when you're reading a paper from me, from Professor Spies, whoever. Like, yeah, really, dude? Okay, maybe. Show me. Prove it to me. Let me show me the evidence, that kind of thing. As always, your basic argumentation should be to make some assertion about something, and then provide some, general, broad evidence, some sort of big picture, that kind of stuff, and then follow it up with specific evidence, specific support, numbers, figures, dates, etc. And it should be scholarly, like we were just mentioning, right? Meaning a really good understanding of the field, the topic overall, and then be as data rich as possible. And so we have a bunch of different topics here. And so by Thursday, we want you guys to have voted for your top 3. So everybody can't have the same project, right? But we have these, and these are all on our module in there. So wildfire, sea level rise, drought, urban heat islands, species distribution shifts, energy development versus sensitive ecosystems, emissions by sector in California, decline of snowpack, air quality, extreme weather, agricultural productivity, urban flooding, mental health impacts of climate change, the equity of decarbonization, marine heat waves, right? So some of those may appeal to you more than others. That's cool. You got to pick your top 3. And then for whatever your top one that you really want to do, you're going to find a data set between now and Thursday, and you're going to submit that along with your vote. So you're saying, hey, if I really am interested in species distribution shifts, and here is a data set that is likely to be one that I would want to use, or at least start with. Maybe I ended up not using it, but that's one that looks like it could be really helpful to make my argument. Cool? Okay. And so when you fill out the form, you're just going to put your name in there. You're going to put choice number 1, choice number 2, choice number 3, and then a link to that, whatever the data set for your number 1 choice is, and then just 3-4 sentences about why you think that data set would be helpful for you to explore the topic of whatever wildfires. Cool? This one?
Yeah, because the goal, I just want to understand the goal, and I know you're saying the word, our argument.
Uh-huh.
So
Your thesis.
Okay, well, because I was taught that, you do your research and the data will tell you
Right.
what the story is, right?
Right.
So how can I predict, if I'm not doing my research first, like what my thesis is?
Oh, good question. We don't want to put the cart before the horse.
Yeah.
So I don't want to pick my opinion first. I'm not asking anybody to pick an opinion, right? But rather, so the issue is, the topic is maybe wildfire, right? So I'm curious as to what wildfires look like because of climate change, right? So that's what I'm going to look at. I don't know what my thesis is before I start looking at some of the data. I just want to look at how climate change is impacting or interacting with this thing called wildfires. So that's why I would start. I might get some data about the history of wildfires. Oh my gosh, are they going up? Are they going down? Oh, they seem like they're getting bigger. Okay, cool. And then what is the evidence that climate change is playing any role in that? Maybe it's playing no role. Maybe it's playing a lot of roles, but let me look. So that's the approach to take. So it's not, you're not giving us your opinion about stuff. It's just that's the topic you guys are going to investigate, and you can choose any number of sort of sub hypotheses or sub stuff. And when I say argument, I'm meaning that in the rhetorical sense, right? I'm not meaning like getting in a fight with me. I just mean what is the thing that you're trying to convince me of. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Are we allowed to, you said you want to keep it in California, but are we allowed to compare?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you don't have to just be California, but there just has to be a California nexus. There has to be a California. Don't want you writing a paper on climate change about Texas or a paper about climate change in Guatemala or something.
Why is that?
Because we live in California, and also because the data is actually much more rich here than in many places.
Okay, that makes sense.
It's a lot easier for you to find data here than
The better data
in
sets.
Guatemala or whatever. Yeah. Okay.